So I have this notepad that I keep on my phone where I write down all of my video ideas that come to me. And sometimes, very late at night, I will wake up, have what I think is a brilliant video idea, and then I write it down. And right now I have written down why Sans Undertale is an incredible D&D encounter. I don't know what I was thinking, and I really did not consider anything of this other than it was just kind of a funny laugh. And then the other day, Sans became a very important figure in the news for some reason. And I felt like it was a sign that I had to talk about this, because at that point, how are you going to avoid it? So welcome to what is definitely going to be my most important video that I've ever made, why Sans Undertale is the perfect D&D encounter. I can't. Now, because I wrote this down when I was clearly very sleepy and not in a full mental state, it took me a while to figure out what I could have possibly meant by this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I might have actually been on to something. Here's the deal. Sans is from the game Undertale. And the game Undertale, I'm just gonna go ahead and get this out of the way, has a very toxic fan base and is kind of, well, it's really memed on. But I do genuinely think it's a great game outside of the people who tend to obsess over it. You are allowed to obsess over things, let me make that clear, but don't get to the point where you are berating other people about your obsessions. That being said, Sans is one of the characters that is first introduced in the very first portion of the game, and he acts as a sort of guide and an understanding to the world, while also being a friend, sort of. See, in Undertale, you can make different decisions, and based on your decisions, the world acts to you differently. Sounds a lot like D&D, right? And the further that you go along, the more actions that you take makes it clear whether Sans is going to be an ally or an enemy to you. But here's the most fascinating thing about Sans. If you go back and play the games different times, he tends to know what you've done previously. He is a character who is known to have a certain amount of determination, which allows him to see into different timelines. In other words, different save states of the game. And because of that, he knows what you've done. And isn't that an interesting idea for a D&D game? Now, don't get me wrong, this is a hugely meta concept, and I will get into how to use Sans as a not meta enemy, but I do think this is very fun to think about. The idea that you have this NPC who knows what the characters have done and also knows the dice manipulation that they achieve whenever they use inspiration, or whenever they re-roll something because they got something else, or they're adding a ton of bonuses onto something because of something that happened out of game. Having an NPC who knows about that can be so interesting because it creates this different feeling about the game. Now, again, I will very heavily emphasize this is not something you should regularly do. I think there are some groups that will really enjoy it and find it a lot of fun. In fact, recently I put an NPC in my game who could hear the players chatting outside of character, which made them very concerned, but it was for a one-shot. It was just a goofy thing. But that is something that I think would be fascinating. The main reason, though, I really think that he is an interesting D&D encounter is because as you go further along in the game, eventually, if you've done everything right, you have to face him. And he is one of the single hardest encounters in the game, if not the hardest. It is incredibly difficult to get past him, and while the mechanics of the game themselves don't really translate to D&D, the idea of facing down an NPC who wanted to be your friend, who wanted you to make the right decisions, but just couldn't stand by what you did, is one of the best ways of causing your characters and your players to evaluate the decisions they've made up to this point of the campaign. Because honestly, this facing off with Sans is one of the emotional crux of the game. Because he was supposed to be your friend. He tried to be your friend. He wanted to. And you did everything you could to push that away. You did everything you could to make sure he would end up being your enemy, down to even killing his brother. So he is somebody who wanted so badly to be there for the player and now has to face them as their final challenge. And that is interesting. and very fun to explore. Because let's take a look at things for a second. Think about your players and what it is that they do in the game. Depending on the type of game that you run, having such an emotionally complex encounter can be absolutely fascinating. Now, I do want to make it very clear that if you have a game that's just beer and pretzels fun, don't do this. It's not going to go over so well, because what I'm about to describe is something that is meant to be an emotional gut punch to the players of sorts. Say you have a game of players with morally ambiguous goals, and so you have one NPC who genuinely wants them to do good things, but you present two options. You present the option of everything that the players want, and you present the option of the morally good thing. Eventually, they will more than likely go down the path of what they want, and so you can have this NPC who has popped up throughout the campaign, who desperately wanted to try and be friends with them, who gave them warnings constantly about where they were going and what would happen if they didn't stop, and that they would have to face them. And now they do have to face them. And so this NPC reveals their true form and fights the players knowing that they have to kill somebody they genuinely kinda liked. But there's no other choice in order to achieve their goals, and it causes them to reevaluate everything. Or if you want to go down more of the meta sense, I do think it is a very fun idea to have this NPC who constantly challenges the players, not the characters, and eventually when it comes down to it, confronts them for their murder hobo ways. But again, you have to have the right type of players and characters for this to work. But if you just have a regular campaign where this NPC continually shows up, what you can do is have the NPC have a morally gray standing, but still genuinely like the party. But the end goal of the campaign, they just cannot allow the players to continue forward with, despite the fact that the players are actually right in this case. The main point I'm trying to get is forcing a fight against somebody that genuinely nobody wants to fight, but must happen because of a conflict between two morals that will never ever agree on each other is, if you do it right, the pure core of what an emotional story beat will be. Having that conflict is so powerful because at that point, the combat almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who beats who. Both sides have already lost because both sides don't have their friend anymore. And it can be so hard to get through those story beats, but it can be such a rewarding thing. And now, do I think that Sans is actually that much of an emotional gut punch in the way that I'm describing? I don't really think so. It's a game and you understand that, but the game does challenge you constantly because it doesn't just let you assume or think, hey, you can go back and return to your save point. It's okay. Sans outright calls out how many times you've returned to your save point in order to beat him and how many times he's beaten you. It doesn't let you do that. And so while it is not, yes, this incredible gut punch that I'm describing, but using key elements from this encounter in your games can potentially create that kind of moment. And the longer that I'm talking about this, the more that I realize I'm still talking about Sans Undertale. I cannot believe I'm making this video. I just felt like the universe needed me to make it. Or maybe that's putting too much actual grandiose pressure on myself. The point is, I kept seeing him everywhere, and after seeing that note and then seeing what I saw on Twitter, what are you gonna do? Either way, I hope this can create a great encounter for your game, and I hope that you can enjoy it. If you wanna hear about some more encounters, I have a video right here that'll help you out. Go out and make the world your own.